An elderly man lay in a hospital bed. The room was dark in order to allow him to sleep. Upon awakening, he saw a lone figure sitting in the corner. Assuming it was his wife of 55 years sitting at his bedside, he whispered, "Ethel, is that you at my side again?" Ethel said, "Yes, dear." After reflecting for a few moments, the man said to her, "Remember years ago when I was in the Veterans Hospital after I fell off that ladder at the house? You were right there with me. You were there with me when we lost everything in that fire. And Ethel, when we were poor, you were there with me too. You were there with me the time I fell out of that tree and broke my leg." Then he got quiet for a moment. Finally he said, "I tell you, Ethel, you are bad luck." Just give any one of us a few moments and we'll find a way to turn something positive into a negative. We'll find something bad to say about something that was actually good. Some of us have the uncanny ability to turn any victory into something that should be viewed with suspicion. But the cynic says that's just being realistic. And it's unfortunate that in many cases that may be the truth. Once when Albert Einstein was being interviewed, he said, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything except our way of thinking. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive." He was then asked by a reporter, "So you don't think there will ever be peace?" Einstein responded, "No. As long as there will be man, there will be wars." And I would add that it's only the naive who would think otherwise. In recognition of how rare peace is throughout the world, Lloyd Corey, author of the book Quotable Quotations, said, "Peace is those brief, glorious moments in history when everybody stands around reloading." That was supposed to be funny. I thought that was kind of cute. Maybe you didn't hear what I said. Just kidding. A few decades ago, a former president of the Norwegian Academy of Sciences, as well as historians from England, Egypt, Germany, and India, came up with some startling information. They said since 3600 BC, that's roughly 5,600 years ago, the world has known only 292 years of peace. I think that's 8%, somebody said. Since 3600 BC, there have been 14,351 wars in which more than 3,640,000,000 people have been killed. It is said that the value of the property destroyed would pay for a golden belt around the world 97.2 miles wide and 33 feet thick. After Israel came out of Egyptian bondage and was traveling to Mount Sinai, in Exodus chapter 17 and verse 8, we're told that Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Then verse 13 tells us that Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. From the time the Israelites first struck swords with the Amalekites until more than 1,500 years later when they were crushed as a nation with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Israelites were a people of war. When Jesus came, he set a higher standard for those who would be followers of the Son of God. In Matthew 5, verse 9, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God," or children of God. Romans 12:18, Paul said, "If possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all people." Romans 14:19, Paul said, "Let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding." 1 Peter 3:10 through 11, Peter says, quoting the Old Testament, whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. The word peace means quietness, rest, to set at one again, or to make united again. The word peace means more than just the absence of trouble. The word is active. It's not passive. As Paul said, we must pursue the things which make for peace. Peter said, seek peace and pursue it. A peacemaker is peaceable. A peacemaker is one who desires peace and who does all he can to maintain it. He forgets about self-interest and self-concern. He's sensitive to the needs of others, but he's not touchy, defensive, or easily offended. Jesus called such people children of God. The role of a peacemaker does not extend to just spreading the gospel. It also extends to lessening tensions, seeking solutions, and ensuring proper communication. Being a peacemaker means loving others and treating others as we want to be treated. Mankind searches for peace in bottles and baggies. Mankind searches for peace in causes, organizations, possessions, armies, and weapons. Mankind has searched in 1,000 different ways, but they've not found the peace they seek because they've continually turned to the wrong source. Most of us will not have a tremendous impact on bringing peace to our community. Most of us will have even less impact on bringing peace throughout the world. We're more likely to have impact in our local schools and in our workplace, but all of us can have a tremendous impact for peace in our families and in our local church. The typical American family has changed dramatically in the past 6 or 7 decades. Fragmented families are now the norm. In 1983, Pat Benatar released a song called "Love is a Battlefield." Unfortunately, the typical American home is no longer a haven of peace. It is often a battlefield. And children growing up in such an environment without love or discipline are emotionally scarred and insecure because they've never known a stable, happy family. Many have grown up with 2 sets of parents, both of whom often care more about their own personal desires and happiness than about the needs of their children. They've grown up watching parents who would sacrifice their children before ever thinking about giving up their own selfish desires. And if Christians behave that way in their homes, and if Christians think that way in their hearts, it's going to show up in how they interact with each other in the local church. I've heard of congregations who have a history of prolonged fussing and bickering, and sometimes those who were involved cannot even remember what started the battle in the first place. I once heard of a congregation that boasted that they had always been at peace. In fact, one member said there had never been any friction in that congregation. Another individual who knew that congregation suggested that it takes moving parts to have friction. Absence of bickering does not necessarily mean there's peace. It might just mean there's no life there. The dead have no differences of opinion because they have no energy and no motion. In Revelation 3, verse 1, Jesus said, "To the angel of the church in Sardis write, these are the words of him who holds the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead." When a congregation is not at peace, it is often because of pride, arrogance, and a desire to control others. There's usually somebody or a few somebodies who think they know what everybody else should be doing. Though others may be doing lots of things that need to be done, if they're not doing the things these people think need to be done, then it doesn't count. Several decades ago, I was preaching at a congregation, and a brother there fit the description I just mentioned. He's a good man. I love him dearly, and we still have a good relationship. But every few months, he would come to me with a list of sermons I should be preaching, a list of things I should be doing. He was always finding fault with me and with others. In one of the last conversations we had while I preached there, he named several things that the congregation was failing at. Then he referred to another congregation about 50 miles away and talked about all the good things they were doing. I simply said, if you started attending there regularly, it wouldn't be very long before you'd be finding faults with them too. There was silence. Then he said, you're right, I complain too much. I've referred to the Golden Rule in a few recent sermons, and it seems to me that the Golden Rule would go a long way towards promoting peace and preventing problems in the local church. Problems are the price of progress. Friction is the result of motion. A church that's alive will have a certain amount of difficulties as a result of its life and activity. But most of those difficulties will be resolved by following the second commandment and the Golden Rule. Jesus said that after loving God supremely, the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. On a previous occasion, Jesus taught his followers to treat others the way you want to be treated, which is known as the Golden Rule. You cannot do one of those things without doing the other. We simply cannot love our neighbor as ourselves if we don't treat our neighbor as we want to be treated. We can talk about love all day long, but if we're not treating people the way that we would like to be treated, we really don't love them at all. If one of those is absent, so is the other. I want to take a few minutes to explore some of the inevitable results of treating others the way we want to be treated. For example, if we treat others the way we want to be treated, we will be interested in the welfare of others. In his little bestseller entitled How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie wrote, "You can make more friends in 2 months by being interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get others interested in you." The motive of the Christian is to please God and be a proper reflection of Christ, not just to win friends and influence people. However, when we learn to apply this principle in how we treat others, we will be happier people, we will be less selfish, and we will have more influence in leading others to Christ. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, Paul said, "Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." An extreme example of this would be the parable of the Good Samaritan. Having come upon someone who had been beaten and robbed, this man put the needs and the interests of the injured man above his own interests. He took time from his own life, and he spared no expense in meeting the needs of this stranger. Treating others the way we want to be treated means being interested in the welfare of others. And if we treat others the way we want to be treated, we will build up others. Christ-like thinking looks for the good in others, and it encourages it. It praises it. I'm sure all of us have heard the statement, if you can't say anything good about someone, don't say anything good at all. A lot of people sound more like Grumpy Cat, who said, if you don't have anything good to say about others, come and sit with me. We can criticize and make fun of others together. And that's a lot easier, and maybe momentarily it's a lot more fun. But it breeds contempt and disrespect for others. Psychologists have concluded that we must have 5 positives to to counter the effects of one negative. This means that if you level some harsh criticism at your child or your spouse or someone else, it'll take 5 positive statements, 5 statements of praise to balance the scales from the criticism. Too much criticism kills the motivation to do better. Paul said in Philippians 2 verse 3, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves." That's the kind of attitude that Paul says in Ephesians 4 verse 16 causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. And these are not just some arbitrary rules we should follow. These are behaviors that will fundamentally change our character and help transform us into the image of Christ. And finally, if we treat others the way we want to be treated, we will think well of others. Love accepts imperfections. 1 Peter 4:8 says, "Love will cover a multitude of sins." And Proverbs 19:11 says, "It is to one's glory to overlook an offense and seek love." To borrow last week's title, do we give others the benefit of the doubt? Do we do our best to think well of others? Or is there constant criticism, fault-finding, and nagging in our family and in our church family? To see how critical we've become, it would be a good exercise to go on what we might call a 24-hour criticism fast. Anytime you utter one criticism about anyone, you must start over. And nurtured mental criticisms count. See how many times you have to start over before you can go an entire 24 hours without making one critical remark. And if you really want to make it interesting, make note of how many times you would have been critical, but you caught yourself before you said anything. And to make it exciting, you might wear a little rubber band or something on your wrist and give it a good little snap every time that you have a critical thought that pops in your mind. And a few of you have probably just been mentally criticizing me for making this suggestion. And then what did I just do? At the root of the golden rule is grace. My preferred definition of grace is undeserved favor. Do we think towards others with kindness and respect even when we feel they don't deserve it? That's grace. Do we treat others with kindness and respect even when we feel they don't deserve it? Don't we want to be treated with kindness and respect even when we don't deserve it? Don't we want to be treated with grace? Then that's how we should treat others. I'm not suggesting that these are the only things required in seeking peace. For example, in order to have true peace, people must be confronted when they've done wrong. There must be accountability. But if we don't love one another, if we don't treat each other as we want to be treated, all the other factors will continually prove to be ineffective. I've known of a few people who concluded that they didn't need to be bothered with all the friction that sometimes occurs when trying to work with a group of Christians. They decided they would just go it alone. They began worshiping by themselves in their own home. But that is not God's plan for His people. We need each other. And if we have the right attitude and the right kind of heart, we will benefit, we will grow from the difficulties and the friction we encounter when working with each other. We'll grow together, we'll learn to love each other, and we'll be stronger and better for it. An old Italian proverb says, "He that will have none but a perfect brother must resign himself to remain brotherless." To treat an imperfect brother critically and impatiently is to advertise our own imperfections. I said it last week, how we treat others often says more about us than it says about them. The golden rule does not just call us to bring no harm to others. It calls us to be active in doing good to others. If we truly want to be children of God, we must be peacemakers. And one element of being a peacemaker is following the golden rule. Let us treat others as we want to be treated so that we can have peace in our families. Let us treat others as we want to be treated so we can have peace in the church. And let us treat others as we want to be treated so that we may glorify God and truly be called children of our Father in heaven. We'll sing the song at this time.